in a lot of these Christian bookstores, college kids worked part-time. They were the ones picking up VeggieTales and finding it hilarious. So most Christian bookstores were putting in VHS decks in the back to show these new kid videos that were coming out. And the college kids started swapping in VeggieTales in the backs of the stores, and Christian bookstores became little VeggieTales theaters. And then when parents came in and said, "What should I look at for my kids?" all these college kids were saying, "Oh, you got to check this out. It's hilarious. You look, your kid's laughing at it right now."
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
I want to welcome you back to Theology Curator, a podcast where we wrestle with biblical studies issues. We look at church and culture, and we're just really trying to see what does it look like to lean into heavy topics, lean into hard stuff, and also to follow Jesus in the 21st century and to be shaped and formed by him. And in this episode, I'm really excited because it's definitely a different kind of interview than I've done in the past. In the past, I've always had to figure out how do I somehow tie the Apostle Paul into my interview format, back when this was exclusively the Paulcast. Well, now there's a bit of freedom, and right as timing would have it, it was absolutely perfect timing. One of the marketers or publicists or assistants of the founder of VeggieTales came to me and said, "Hey, Phil Vischer is back at it, and he has a new season of VeggieTales coming out, a new Bible that he's helped create, and would you be interested in interviewing him?" And I just took the opportunity. I love VeggieTales, even now. I think they're amazing, awesome, hilarious, funny, awesome. I said all those things already, but you get the point, right? And one of the things that's really special to me is that through VeggieTales, my kiddo has learned about God's love, Jesus' compassion, and old songs that maybe I grew up singing that Bob and Larry and the others sing as well. This Little Light of Mine, these sorts of amazing kiddo songs that, to be honest, when I was so cool, there was a season right about when Lydia was born that I was probably too cool for school when it came to Christian culture stuff, and probably would have been like, I don't want my kids listening to, old Christian-y songs or whatever. We're too cool for that. And what I realized as I started to have this beautiful responsibility with my wife to nurture and shape and guide my daughter into a life with Jesus, I realized that words really do shape imagination. And maybe there are some kiddo songs that, this word or that one I would change. But for the most part, these old kid songs are very helpful for shaping the lives of young spiritual kiddos. And so they've been our constant soundtrack in the car for about 3.5, 4 years now, probably. And that continues to this day. We were listening to VeggieTales like 2 days ago. So we also watch the shows as much as we can and the movies and all of that. So I just have a personal debt of gratitude to Phil Vischer and all of those who are involved in that project. And so I want to present to you a conversation that I just had with Phil. And I think it's going to be more than you think. Because if I were just going to randomly listen to a podcast about, a founder of a cartoon, I would think, wow, this whole thing's going to be hilarious, but kind of fluffy. And it is hilarious at times, but certainly not fluffy. Certainly not without some deep, deep spirituality. Phil has walked a journey from the first half of life to the second half of life in a way that is honestly mind-blowing. And I am just so honored to be able to present this interview for y'all to consider. So I hope this is helpful in your spiritual journey. I hope that you can glean something. And I hope that you continue to follow and seek after Jesus in intelligent and humanizing ways. So here, my friends, is the interview. Well, I want to welcome Phil Vischer, who is a co-founder of VeggieTales. And if you have been a Christian for any length of time, VeggieTales may have been something that helped nurture your faith as a kid, or perhaps it was something that was impactful for your own kids. And so, Phil, I am absolutely thrilled to have you on Theology Curator with me. That's such a huge honor to have you here.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here and help you curate some theology.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a story there. We won't go long into it. So this podcast originally was all about Paul. It was called the Paulcast. And so I've had people like N.T. Wright on the show, Scott McKnight, some of these heavy hitters in those zones, right? And I still do a lot of that, but my actual website is Theology Curator, and it's a much broader. We want to talk about Jesus. We want to talk about culture. We want to talk about sort of the spiritual formation stuff. And so that shift has taken place recently, and it's given me the opportunity to interview folks that have a good contribution to make, but maybe aren't necessarily going to go into nuancing weird things about Romans chapter 4. So,
right. Got it.
So it's honestly a huge joy to have you here. And Phil, I'm wondering if you could maybe start us off by sharing a little bit of your own story, your own spiritual background, however you feel comfortable there, and how it led you to at least the founding and beginnings of VeggieTales.
Yeah, well, I grew up in a very, very Christian family. Both sides, going back at least 4 generations, were strongly evangelical Christian. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was a pastor in Omaha, Nebraska, and became the first non-denominational radio preacher in America in 1923. Started preaching on the air in Omaha, and preached every Sunday to the radio show from 1923 until he died in 1964, at which point it was the oldest, longest-running radio show in America. So he also founded a Bible missionary conference in Northwest Iowa and one of the larger churches in Omaha. So I grew up around heroes of the faith, missionaries, well-known speakers, and then just kind of a family culture that's what we admired. We admired heroes of the faith and missionaries who had given it all for Jesus. So as a kid, I was a shy kid. I was a creative kid. I was very bashful. I liked to play with puppets. I had a hard time figuring out how I was going to be able to do something of value, in the kind of frame of value that my family had, which was the highest value. The highest value was to be a missionary who took the gospel to people who might eat you.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yes, one of my great uncles actually did that. He was the first white man to enter a section of Irian Jaya and brought the gospel to cannibals.
Oh my gosh!
He was the top of the food chain. He was the best. Then there were missionaries that went to safe places, and I had other relatives that did that. They were next in line. And then there were pastors, like my great grandpa, and they were really good. And then there were businessmen who made a lot of money to support all of the people that were doing God's work that we've just listed.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much it. That was the ecosystem. So my other grandfather was one of those guys, a businessman who made a lot of money and supported missions.
Interesting.
And so as a shy kid who liked to play with puppets and Super 8mm film cameras, I was having a hard time seeing myself kind of in God's ecosystem. Where do I fit? And I remember I was just starting to get into computers in high school. And in 1982, I was a sophomore in high school, and MTV turned on.
Oh.
I think it was the year before MTV came on. In 1982, our neighborhood was wired for cable, and we went from 4 channels to 42 channels, if I remember correctly.
Wow.
And I remember sitting there watching MTV, and in the early days of MTV, the music videos were really crazy experimental stuff. So experimental animation techniques, and it was like a film festival. And I remember having a couple of strong reactions to MTV in 1982. The first one was, "This is so cool."
Yeah.
It was so creative. There was so much creativity on display. My second reaction was, though, I think this is trouble. Because, I grew up in Sunday school, and the values I learned in Sunday school were not the values that were coming across in the music videos.
Right.
And quite often they were the exact opposite. And I remember thinking, if everyone my age thinks this is as cool as I do, I think we might have a problem. And it was kind of at that moment that I realized, I think I might be uniquely gifted to doing something about that.
Yeah.
To use technology and filmmaking to bring the values I learned in Sunday school into media in some creative, technological way. And so that was 1982. I was about 16 years old. And then it just became a matter of, how am I going to do that? Where am I going to go? Do I have to go to Bible college? Do I need a degree? Do I need to go to film school? I initially thought, I'm going to go to Bible college for just a year, get a Bible certificate, and then I'm going to go to film school. So I went to our small denominational Bible college was in Minneapolis, and I went up there. It's actually out in the cornfields about an hour west of Minneapolis.
Sounds inspired.
And met, yes, very inspiring place. It had been a Jesuit seminary, and then they sold it, and our denomination bought it and moved their school there. So I was sitting around in the middle of a Minnesota winter. I had met Mike Naraki, who was also from my denomination and also went to that little school, and who later became the Larry the Cucumber to my Bob the Tomato.
Yeah.
And we had to do some kind of service project for class credit. For a shy kid, they all sounded terrifying because they, street witnessing in downtown Minneapolis, or going to old folks' homes and meeting the elderly, and I didn't want to do any of those things. And then I got to the bottom of the list, and at the bottom of the list was puppet ministry.
Oh.
I thought, I could do that. Hide behind a felt, crouch behind a curtain and be silly. I've been doing that like my whole life. And turns out Mike had also been doing that back at his home church. They had a puppet ministry. So he also applied for that, and that's where we met. And started doing puppet shows in northern Minnesota, driving around in a van, writing really weird scripts that had Monty Python influences and Dr. Demento silly song influences. Yeah. And that led to writing some scripts that kind of hinted at where I was going. I wrote a script called The Forgive-O-Matic, which was like a late night TV commercial spoof from Ronco, a device that would slice and dice your sins away, that actually ended up in VeggieTales episode number 2. Instead of the silly song, it was the Forgive-O-Matic.
Yeah.
And so that led to that direction. And then after Bible college, both Mike and I were, after 3 semesters, invited not to return to Bible college.
Oh, nice.
Because we had failed chapel. We were having so much fun writing puppet scripts and staying up late and then driving around putting on puppet shows that we didn't make it to chapel often enough. And if you failed chapel 2 semesters in a row, you had to sit out the next semester. And I decided to come back to Chicago and got a job in video production, which led to computer animation, which led to pulling out some of those old scripts that we'd written in the puppet days and seeing if I could come up with characters that were simple enough to bring those scripts to life on a VHS tape for kids.
Yeah.
And that led to a cucumber and a tomato.
Wow. And so you and Mike at this time are together and are saying, okay, well, Bible school was okay. Let's still take this passion and do something with it. And this is where you get to cucumber and tomato. And
Mike was actually headed for the path he had put himself on was to be a missionary doctor.
Oh.
So he he liked the creative stuff, but his dad was in the Air Force and his mom was a nurse. So he didn't really conceive of that as a career. He didn't see that as a modeled as a career. So he was thinking about the Peace Corps, and then he ended up moving to Chicago with me to go to pre-med. And it was while he was in pre-med that I came up with Bob and Larry and started doing these experiments, and finally said, "Hey, Mike, would you come up with a voice for this cucumber I'm animating? I'm going to do a voice for the tomato." And then eventually, when it looked like that was going somewhere, he said, "Well, maybe I won't go to medical school. Maybe I'll become a cucumber instead."
Wow. That's I'm sure there were some interesting conversations involved in that with the family and all of that. But hey, that's quite the turn, and it makes sense. I mean, it changed the landscape of culture in so many ways. So I think a lot of us are grateful for that. And so I mean, it's awesome. So, okay. So just get me focused here. What year are we in now? When this finally comes together and you've got voices, you've got characters, and start propelling towards a vision. Yeah.
I started my own company. I was really aggressively ahead of myself, always getting ahead of myself. So, I was still 19 when I got kicked out of Bible college. I came back and I got a job in video production in 3 years. So I was 22. I decided I'd learned everything there was to know about video production and I should start my own company. So I started my own company doing graphics and then moving into computer animation. So this was 1989.
Okay.
And in 1990, I first drew Bob and Larry.
Yeah.
Tried to raise money, spent about 2 years trying to raise money, got nowhere. Finally had a couple I'd gotten married in the meantime, and we were in a small group with several other couples at a church in downtown Chicago on the north side. And one of the couples finally, after praying with us about this for 2 years of seeing me knock on doors and not getting anywhere, finally came to me and said, "You know, what you're trying to do is too important for us to let it not happen." And they wrote me a check for $80,000 out of their retirement fund and just said, "We want you to get started."
Wow.
And that's what led me. Yeah. So I was able to quit my job, buy a computer, and officially try to start figuring out how to make vegetables talk.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was 93. I quit my job in June or July of 93. Hired a kid who I was working at a video production house doing computer animation, very early rudimentary computer animation back then, because we're still, 2-3 years pre Toy Story.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a kid come in who just graduated from University of Illinois, which also had an early computer animation program, wanted to work at the post house. And I said, "You don't have enough experience to work here, but I'm about to leave and I'm starting something and I might need help from someone like you. So give me your phone number." And he was my first hire. Then I hired one other kid from the Art Institute of Chicago, which also had a very early rudimentary computer animation program. And those two kids and I triple shifted around the clock on, Mike wasn't an animator, so he didn't help at that point, but we triple shifted on my one computer around the clock for 4 months to animate the first VeggieTales episode. And that was in the fall through Christmas of 1993.
Wow. And so it was released in 94. Am I tracking that right?
I sold it direct in 93.
Oh, okay.
So I took out ads. I decided I was going to build the Amway of Christian video.
Okay.
Which did not work at all. I took out ads in Christian parenting magazines and tried to sell, and we sold about 500 copies for Christmas of 1993 of the first video. But because I'd gone to publishers, I'd gone to Christian publishers before that saying, "Would you fund me to make this?" And they all said, "No, but if you make it on your own, then bring it back and we'll look at selling it for you." And I was mad. That made me mad. Well, how am I supposed to make it if you don't help me?
Yeah.
So when I first made it, I thought, I'm not going to go back to you guys because you didn't help me. So I'm going to sell it myself. But some of the first orders that came in were from those same publishing companies who
Yeah.
saw the ads in magazines and said, "Oh, look, he made it. He
Yeah.
actually made it." And as soon as Word Entertainment down in Nashville got their copy that they ordered over Christmas of 1993, they called up and put my wife and I on a plane down to Nashville to talk about a deal because they loved it. And that led to about 5 months of negotiating until we had a deal for 11 episodes of VeggieTales to go into Christian bookstores. So that was 94. And the first two came out in Christian bookstores in fall of 1994.
Wow. I mean, just a lot of groundwork, a lot of probably joy and frustration all coming into that creative process. And then to see it come to fruition. By the time it was in Christian bookstores, is that what led to kind of the sort of rapid growth and explosion and popularity of the show?
For 2 years in Christian bookstores, it did almost nothing.
Okay.
It just kind of sat there as parents said, "Vegetables telling Bible stories. Let's see what James Dobson has."
Yeah.
All of the top-selling kids videos at the time were from Focus on the Family with the stamp of James Dobson on them as the Pope of the evangelical world at the time. So,
yep, I've been there.
So,
yep.
Yeah, so I think 10 out of 10 of the top-selling Christian kids videos when we launched were from Focus on the Family.
Okay.
And that was 94. But what we believe happened is over the course of Christmas 94 and then across 95 is that in a lot of these Christian bookstores, college kids worked part-time, and they tended to work in the back of the store, which is where the kids' stuff was. So they were the ones picking up VeggieTales and say, "Okay, just put it on the VHS deck in the back and see what it's like," and finding it hilarious.
Yeah.
So most Christian bookstores were putting in VHS decks in the back to show these new kids videos that were coming out. And the college kids started swapping in VeggieTales in the backs of the stores, and Christian bookstores became little VeggieTales theaters. And then when parents came in and said, "What should I look at for my kids?" all these college kids were saying, "Oh, you got to check this out. It's hilarious. Look, your kid's laughing at it right now." And that's what happened. So it didn't really take off until Christmas of 1996.
Okay.
2 years after it launched. And then suddenly it just exploded.
Oh, yeah. And that totally tracks with my experience of VeggieTales. That's about when I was entering pretty close to middle school, I think. And I just remember kids at youth group saying, "Have you seen these videos? They're hilarious. Yes, they're for little kids, but they're so funny," and through high school. I even think our youth group hosted like a premiere of one of them at one point, and it just, And I kind of took that with me as I moved into youth ministry eventually after college, and where it became a new level of significance was when I had my first kid, and now we have two, Lydia and Chloe. And I'm a church planter, and we've been at this for a few years. We're in Seattle, and so I often tell people, planting in a context like this for us has been more like the tortoise than the hare in some ways. And one of the things that's true in our scenario is we don't have a robust kids ministry at this point. We have some childcare and some things, but as far as like putting my daughter in formation environments, we're still trying to put that together. And so early on, VeggieTales became a bridge to that world for our family. Yep. And so, even to this day, I can think of 2 or 3 days ago, we were doing all the classic VeggieTale Bible songs. She now once, puts them on. And so for us, like just hearing the trajectory of the story, it makes perfect sense. And I
remember after the first batch of videos went out, we started getting letters, from parents. And I remember getting one that had an invitation to a VeggieTales party, and they just said, "We just had a VeggieTales party at our house, and we wanted to send you one of the invitations we made." Then it said, "P.S. By the way, we don't have kids. This was a party just for grown-ups." that was the first time I thought, wait a minute,
Whoa.
what's going on here? But then we found out about, VeggieTales viewing parties sprouting up on college campuses and all over the place. And then what was really cool was at, churches, the high school youth group would use VeggieTales to teach the Bible to the younger kids, because it was engaging enough for the older kids to actually want to participate. So that was pretty exciting to see, different age groups come together because they'd found something that they all liked.
Yeah. No, that definitely rings true of my experience of it. And, like I said, now as a dad, it's like, wow, this is more important than I would have ever understood, when I was just watching because it was silly and fun.
Right.
And creative, all of those things we've always admired, but now to come full circle. And before, I have a couple of other questions about the story, but I had a question and maybe a favor. And if it's not something you do, it's fine. But do you feel comfortable talking to us as Bob at all? Like, do you do that, or is that a little weird for you?
I don't do interviews as Bob, and primarily because it's kind of boring. Because he's the straight guy. So he has to give the correct answer.
Yes.
Or he'll get in trouble.
Totally.
If I ever do like live radio, it's almost dangerous doing it as Bob. Because if I go off script too far, now that's an official Bob statement. So I'll do Mr. Lunt. I'll say, can I be Mr. Lunt? Mr. Lunt can say anything and nobody really ever gets offended. He can just go off. And I've had a ton of fun ad-libbing as Mr. Lunt. That's where Paw Grape is another one where I can generally ad-lib and wander all over the place. But Mr. Lunt can get away with the most.
So my question is there any way you could say hi to my girls? Just in one of the voices you feel comfortable with? Their names are Lydia and Chloe.
Yeah, I can do Bob, but he won't get himself into trouble saying Lydia and Chloe. Okay, here comes. Hi there, Lydia and Chloe. I'm Bob the Tomato, and I'm talking to your dad right now on his podcast. Isn't that weird? Okay, goodbye.
Awesome. You have no idea.
Okay.
My older daughter has just been thrilled that this is happening. So she's at school. She's a first grader.
Cool.
So yeah, that's awesome.
Very cool.
And it's also just really cool, I think, for our listeners to connect. Wow, this voice we've heard for all these years. There's someone behind this voice. There's someone behind this beautiful story we've been invited into. There's a story behind this story, and
there's always a story behind the story.
There is, and I know, like, the first time I was exposed to that story was when I was still in youth ministry. It must have been about 10 years ago. Maybe I'm off on the date there, but. National Youth Workers Convention in San Diego, I think is where it was, with youth specialties. And I remember you sharing, and I personally was so touched. I walked away because it was during a harder season of your life in a lot of ways, but a hopeful season. And you kind of brought that tension out to us in a really impactful way. And I'm curious because I know the road, the connection of, there's a business side, obviously, to VeggieTales and your life story. And there's a passion and faith side. And those often probably coincide quite well. And there's probably been some tensions there. And so I'm curious, how has that journey been? Because I know now you're kind of back at it. And we're going to talk more about what you're up to currently towards the back end of the conversation. But does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, and because I had the upbringing I had, I kind of came out of the womb looking for something big to do for God. It was just, it was in the water that I grew up in. It's like, what are you doing for God? What are you doing for God?
Right.
I hope it's big. Is it big? Because if it's big, you get to be up in front. You get to tell your story. You can be on the radio with, great grandpa. You can impress people if it's something big. And so once VeggieTales started taking off, it was very easy for me to just expand my vision to something much, much bigger. I'm not just telling some stories. I'm building the next Disney. And that's literally where I went almost overnight.
Wow.
I think God wants me to build the next Disney. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great for the kingdom if there was a Disney, that had a Christian worldview? And so I kind of just figured, well, I think I'm the one God has chosen. I'm Walt. I'm the new Walt, and he's chosen me. I've been anointed for this. And so it's going wonderfully, and it will continue to go wonderfully. So let's put the pedal to the metal and see how fast we can grow this thing. And, so I just wanted to do everything. I wanted to do feature films. I wanted to do live theater. I wanted to do toys and books and music. And someday I wanted to build a theme park and, hotels. I just wanted to be Walt. And I drove that vision so aggressively, assuming that God would show up and bless it, that I drove the company right into bankruptcy. And in 2003, had to file bankruptcy and lost, everything, characters, all the films, everything was just packed up in a box and sold at a bankruptcy auction.
Wow.
And it was right about that time that I got a call from Biola University asking if I would do their spring commencement address to, inspire all these fresh Christian kids who want to go change the world and do big things for God.
Great timing.
And I had no idea what I could possibly say to them that wouldn't depress them, because I was so confused about what it was happening to my dream of what I wanted to do for God. So I said, no, I can't do it. And they said, well, what about our winter commencement? It's in 5 months. Can you do that one? And I thought, okay, God, I'm going to say yes. And then you have 5 months to unpack this for me and give me something to say. And I spent about 3 months after that just reading the Bible and praying and doing some Bible studies and listening to some sermons. I just, for the first time, really slowed down enough to just sit with God, and say, what just happened and what does it mean? Where am I wrong in my theology? And in that period, God really kind of held up a mirror to me to say, did you notice how little you were enjoying what you were doing over the last few years? And I said, yeah, it was not fun. But who said it's supposed to be fun? I'm working for you. It's like, going to cannibals in Erie and Jaya. You're going to get your leg chewed off. It's hard.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And just the notion came back. Yeah. Okay. It's not supposed to be fun necessarily, but joy is a fruit of the Spirit. Do you have any joy while you're doing this? I was like, no, I'm anxious, and I'm stressed. And I'm worried about all of this, that I'm not doing enough fast enough. And I realized none of those are on the list of the fruit of the Spirit. Stress is not a fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah. Wow.
And I realized that what God showed me is that I'd made the work I was doing for him more important than my relationship with him, because I thought my work was more important to him than I was.
Yes.
And God just had to, kind of hold me down and let all my little dreams and plans and visions and papers, white papers, just let it all fall away to say, no, would you just be quiet? Would you just sit still and learn how to be with me?
Yeah.
And so coming out of that, so I went out to Biola in the fall to do their winter commencement and gave what I thought would be the worst commencement speech in history. Where I got up and said, whatever you're excited about doing for God, are you ready to let it go? Could you just put it on the altar and kill it and just rest in him? Because until you're ready to do that, until you're ready to do nothing for God except be with God, you're really not ready to do anything for God.
Wow.
And then I was waiting for the hook to come and grab and pull me off the stage for depressing 2,500 graduates in one fell swoop. And instead, they said it was the first standing ovation they could remember in the history of Biola commencement addresses. And I had 40-year-old dads come up to me in tears saying, we always talk about our successes in the church. We never talk about our failures. Thank you so much. And that turned into, that was a CD of that commencement speech, ended up at Willow Creek Church. And they said, could you come and do that talk for our children's ministry conference? And then the CD of that talk went to Christianity Today. And they said, can we have someone write a feature story about that talk you gave? And then the feature story in Christianity Today went to a couple publishers. And they said, would you consider letting us have someone turn that into a book. Which I said, no, I'm a writer. So let me see.
Yeah. Let me pull that one off. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that ended up being my book, Me, Myself, and Bob, a true story about God, dreams, and talking vegetables, which is really about the death of a dream. You know, when does a dream become an idol? And when is the death of a dream a mercy killing, you know, for your own spiritual sanity?
Yeah.
And I've been speaking a lot at college campuses and Christian business things about, you know, what do you do when it all falls apart? What's your theology of failure? And where is God, you know, when your dream has died? And it's been really interesting. It was not a ministry that I expected to have.
Yeah. Wow. And I'm reminded, I just came through a kind of hard season and stumbled into, Richard Rohr has a book called Falling Upward, and talks about the container of our lives. We spend the first half of life building the container, and there's good there. You know, we build our dreams, our ambitions, some things that are very holy. And often we have some sort of calamity somewhere in the middle of our life that opens us up to something that's much deeper and holding the pain in a new kind of way. And the container now becomes a space that now needs to be filled in the second half of life. And it sounds like in a lot of ways, without overimposing those categories, that that's the journey a lot of people are finding themselves in. And your story both models it and invites others to consider new categories for how to process it. So that's, thank you for sharing that. And it's, you know, fast forwarding here as we come closer to the end, I heard that talk you gave and kind of just watched, and I knew, you know, there was some VeggieTales stuff here and there. In the last couple of years, Netflix has had a series, and your involvement has been voice acting for the most part until recently?
Mostly just voice acting. I wrote 2 episodes after the Bankruptcy. I wrote The Wizard of Oz and Lord of the Beans. Those were my 2 episodes. And then I just felt called to do new things, you know, and stop kind of trying to grab onto the old characters that were clearly no longer mine. And I also felt like God wanted me to take kids deeper into the Bible than I could in the format of VeggieTales. Especially when someone else owned VeggieTales.
Right.
It was hard to change the direction, and suddenly we're going to teach deep theology.
Yeah.
So then that's when I did a new series called What's in the Bible, and came up with a new set of characters, a mix of puppets and animation, and then me on screen teaching to take kids in deeper and to be able to touch on all the stories of the Bible, not just the ones, you know, that make good, silly songs.
Yeah.
And that was about a 5-year project, which was great. And it's out there, and there's a, you know, Sunday school curriculum version of it. And then after that, just in the last 2 years, VeggieTales is now inside of Universal, NBC Universal. And when that was announced, it was part of DreamWorks, and then Universal bought DreamWorks, and now it's in Universal. And the Trinity Broadcast Network, which is the world's biggest, you know, Christian broadcaster, approached Universal to say, "Hey, could we do something with VeggieTales? Are you going to do anything with VeggieTales? Could we do something with VeggieTales?" And Universal said, "Well, you can't have it, but we'll rent it to you, basically.
Oh, okay.
We'll give you a license to make a new series if you fund it and we can approve it." And they both reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you get involved creatively to make it more like it used to be in the very beginning? That's what we want it to be like."
Yeah.
And I said, that I would do. That I would do. If you want to, you know, turn it into some weird new thing that doesn't feel like VeggieTales, I'm not interested. If you want it to feel like, you know, year 1, 2, 3 again, I'm interested. And they had the notion of, what if we did something like the Muppet Show, where Bob and Larry were trying to put on a show in front of an audience, and you were backstage with them and in front of the curtain with them. And I'd actually had that same thought about 15 years ago, because the Muppet Show was my favorite TV show when I was a kid. Like, wouldn't that be fun? Because Bob the Tomato's kind of like Kermit the Frog, and anxious and nervous about things going well. And, you know, Larry the Cucumber just comes up with random ideas, and it fits. Let's do that. So that's the concept. We're doing 18 new episodes that are for TV broadcast, for streaming and broadcast. And it's Bob and Larry putting on a variety show, where they have to try to come up with a topic for their show every night. And then they get a letter from a kid with a question, and that kid's letter sparks the idea for the show. But then they have to brainstorm. So how do we teach that? And it's multiple little segments. I can deal with more obscure Bible stories because the segments are shorter.
Yeah.
So, I'm doing Abigail and Nabal. I'm doing Paul and Silas in prison, and Peter and John and the beggar at the temple, doing the prodigal son, as a simple story, not turning it into some big, exaggeratedly extra biblical tale to fill time, but just kind of telling it like it is in the Bible, but with veggies and music. Yeah. And it's really fun. Awesome. So those will come out next year on TBN, and then eventually on streaming platforms or wherever else videos go these days.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. I mean, it sounds to me like here you are, with all of these new projects you've been doing, and the personal growth, and what I sense is a growing passion that it sounds like it's always been there, but the faith of the next generation, the biblical literacy of the next generation. And two of the things that you have going on right now, of course, are the new season that you just shared about, and also the Laugh and Learn Bible that is kind of another step in those areas of passion. And it sounds to me like great, some really great resources that are coming our way.
Yeah. The Laugh and Learn Bible for Kids is kind of me taking everything that I learned going through the Bible for 5 years for the What's in the Bible series, and actually putting it into a printed storybook Bible that kids can carry around, that parents can read before bed. So it's 52 5-minute Bible stories, but going through the hard parts of the Bible as well as the fun parts, because that's so many of really kind of reductionist kids' Bibles really just give kids snapshots from the Bible without any of the connective tissue. Totally. Because they're uncomfortable with the bad news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's in there.
Yep. But here's the deal. Kids that watch movies, kids that watch Disney movies and Pixar movies know you don't have a story if nothing bad happens.
Yeah.
They know that if you're watching Finding Nemo, that there's going to be sad parts and there's going to be scary parts as well as the happy parts, or it's not a story.
Right.
And so what kids are missing is the fact that the Bible is a story and that your faith is inside this giant story. And that's what I'm trying to do, is let's tell you the whole story, give you a condensed version of the whole arc of Scripture that's age appropriate, for 6 to 10-year-olds is the goal, but doesn't skip the sad parts, because that's what makes it a story. And when we tell the story and then we can help kids find their place in it, and they can find their place in faith when they see how they're part of a story.
Oh, that touches me in all kinds of personal, deep ways. That's beautiful. And, definitely looking forward. Is that out yet? When does that?
It came out last week.
Okay.
It came out last week.
There it is.
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon right now. In fact, for the first week, it was the #1 kids Bible. So we're off to a good start.
That's a great. Yay! Yeah, you should be pumped about that. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Well,
cool.
You kind of, if you're doing a book nowadays, you kind of have to try to get up at the top. Mm-hmm. At least for the beginning, because all the algorithms, kick in, and if you never make it near the top of the list, the algorithms never help you stay up there, and you can spend a year writing something and have it completely disappear, forever, because some software somewhere decided that no one is noticing it, and so we're just going to throw it away. So it's exciting that it at least started out up there, and that gives people a chance to have it recommended to them when they're looking for something on Amazon, which means they can see it and show it to their kids and then tell their friends about it, and hopefully spread the word and get more kids plugged into the real narrative of the Bible.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to just hear the totality of the story. And I know that when I say totality, that's undercutting the reality that there's so much more that could have been said and explored, things that maybe are deeply personal to you. But thank you for letting us in. And I was wondering, just as we close, this is kind of a last kind of thought here, is I'm wondering what you would say to a business creative type who is on fire for Jesus, wants to step into that work, wants to step into that story, given your own personal story, what would you say to them that maybe you wouldn't have said to when you were younger?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say don't focus on outcomes, focus on obedience. If God has gifted you as a storyteller, tell stories. Don't worry about, but it wasn't a success and it didn't work and it's not reaching very many people. That's God's business. The outcomes are in God's hands. The call, the obedience to use the gifting for the benefit of others, that's all you have control of. So you worry about that. Leave the rest up to God. And also, I see a lot of kids get discouraged because they feel called to do something and they may be gifted to do something, but it may not be capable of supporting them financially. And you have to realize that there's no biblical promise that what you do in ministry is what will support you financially.
Right.
There's so many in the world of secular art. There's so many screenwriters and poets and children's book authors that have day jobs at Starbucks.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That work elsewhere, or they work in ad agencies and they're writing children's book in the evening. Are they discouraged by that? Not really. They're getting to do what they love. But when we decide, okay, God wants me to write children's books, and the children's books I write need to buy me a middle-class lifestyle because that's part of God's plan, now suddenly we've set ourselves up for disillusionment. Like, okay, I'm doing what you asked me to do, God. Where's my house in the suburbs? And that's just, and I relate it to if God calls you into missions. He says, I'm going to Uganda. I'm going to work with the poor in Uganda. Do you have the expectation that your work with the poor in Uganda will result in you having a upper middle class lifestyle?
Right.
No, you don't even have that expectation. But when we do stuff here in America in ministry, we have that expectation. And I just, if more kids, like kids that want to break into ballet in New York, if they were willing to just do the hard work of, I'm working at Starbucks to get my health insurance, and then I'm pursuing my passion and my art in my spare time because I feel that's what God is calling me to do.
Yeah. Wow, Phil, so much wisdom there, and so much just joy getting to hear from you, and I want to just thank you and wish just the best of luck and prayers for your new projects, that they'll touch many lives, and trusting that God's going to continue to use your ministry. And again, my personal gratitude is one expression of thousands and thousands of people, that probably even millions, that have connected to VeggieTales because of the journey that you've been on. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Well, friends, I hope this interview inspired you to consider what it looks like for you in your own journey as someone who is working and maybe even a creative, or someone who has lots of responsibilities, big dreams, wherever you may be in the journey. Hopefully, some of what Phil had to say about his journey with VeggieTales gives you not just some inspiration, but some perspective and another nudge towards looking at and seeking after Jesus in the journey that you have that is uniquely yours. I do want to also highlight the various projects that we talked about on the episode. Of course, the Laugh and Learn Bible for Kids is out now. It's available on Amazon or anywhere else you would find Christian books. And I've looked at some of the imagery, and I'm going to get a hold of a copy of it myself. And my guess and my gut would tell me that it might be a very useful resource for many of you with younger kids. And of course, the Veggie episodes are coming out soon. The Best Christmas Gift will be available starting 10/22, which isn't too far from now, October 22nd. And you can see them on TBN, which I think pretty much everyone gets that free, if I remember right. At least I know I did as a kid. And also in streaming and DVD format, they'll be available at Walmart, Target, CBA channel retail stores, Jelly Telly, and on most other digital platforms. So I wanted to just give that info to you in case you're really excited about what is going on with VeggieTales. And thank you so much for listening as we step into this new season of being a podcast that is a little broader than Paul, because we are trying to explore all things having to do with biblical studies, church and culture, and faith formation, because my hope is that this podcast assists many people in following Jesus in intelligent and humanizing ways.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.